All right, we are stepping right into the ancient lore of the Parva today, straight into the heart of one of mythology's most tragic and just overwhelmingly massive cataclysms. We're not just talking about your standard myth here. We are looking at the systematic mythological taxonomy of a mass execution, and it happens on a literal cosmic scale. So get ready, because the sheer magnitude of the imagery we're about to unpack is absolutely mind-blowing.
I want to hook you right out of the gate with this quote from the narrator of the text, Sauti. He's telling his listener, Saunaka, many thousands and tens of thousands and billions of snakes fell into the fire. Just sit with that word for a second. Billions. This isn't a story about, a handful of serpents meeting a bad end. The text is emphasizing a number so unimaginably vast that the narrator himself admits he literally can't count them all. He can only even remember the principal figures, the kings and generals of this doomed species.
Okay, so here's our game plan to get through this dense lore without getting totally lost. We're going to start with the great snake sacrifice, then map out the 5 serpent lineages, take a look at their monstrous forms and powers, and finally, we'll confront their inescapable, tragic fate.
Starting off with Section 1, the Great Snake Sacrifice, a cosmic execution. What the source describes here isn't just a wild forest fire or some random natural disaster. It's a highly ritualized, incredibly systematic execution of ancient, powerful beings. It's a sacrifice where the offerings aren't grain or regular animals, but entirely sentient, godlike creatures. And here's the deeply tragic irony of this whole thing. Despite how terrifying they were, these creatures were completely incapacitated by destiny. The text actually explicitly says they were afflicted with their mother's curse. Because of that primordial curse, their immense physical might meant absolutely zero. They were rendered so helpless that Sauti describes them falling into this blazing sacrificial fire like libations of butter. They just melted away. Moving to Section 2, the 5 serpent lineages. These were ancient dynasties. When you read this ancient text, you're immediately hit with just a massive, chaotic wall of names. To actually grasp the narrative, we have to organize these countless billions into 5 distinct noble houses or lineages. It really frames this mythology a lot like the great houses in a sprawling fantasy epic. We've got the lineage of Vasuki, featuring powerful serpents like Kutisha and Manasa. Then there's the race of Takshaka, with names like Puchandika and Mandalaka. We see the Airavata lineage, the Kauravya lineage with Uraka and Kundala, and finally the mighty Dhritarashtra lineage with Sankukarna and Pitaraka. These aren't just lists of names. These are royal families, entire dynasties being systematically tossed into the flames. And the text doesn't just name them, it vividly paints them for us. Take the principal snakes of Vasuki's race, for example. They were incredibly vibrant, specifically described as being blue, red, and white. But, that beauty was paired with what's called a terrible form, huge bodies, and a poison that was incredibly deadly. Just imagine the visual of these massive, brightly colored titans raining down from the sky into a blazing fire. Now, contrast the Vasuki with the Dhritarashtra lineage. The source material specifically highlights that this house was endued with the speed of the wind. They carried a virulent poison, but more importantly, they were known widely for their achievements. I find that detail so heartbreaking. These weren't mindless beasts, right? They were celebrated entities. They had histories, victories, fame, and all of it was being erased in an instant. That brings us to Section 3, monstrous forms and powers. Let's talk about their scale and abilities. So we know who these factions were, but to understand what they actually looked like, you have to realize their physical scale pretty much defies human comprehension. These were not snakes as you and I understand them today. 3, 7, and 10. Those are the numbers of heads possessed by these creatures. Sauti explains that some had 3 heads, some had 7, and others had 10. We are talking about monstrous hydra-like beings, thrashing and writhing around as they are pulled by the thousands into the flames. And their venom was equally catastrophic. The text compares their poison to the fire at the end of the yuga. Now, in ancient Indian cosmology, a yuga is an epoch, a massive age of the world, and the fire at the end of a yuga is the cosmic fire meant to completely unmake creation itself. That is the exact level of toxicity and destructive power we're talking about, running through the veins of these beings. To really wrap our heads around their size, we have to look at the specific measurements used in the text, the yama and the yojana. These are ancient units of astronomical measurement. The text states these creatures were the length of a yama, a yojana, and even 2 yojanas,
We aren't talking about feet or meters here. We're talking about creatures whose bodies literally stretched for absolute miles across the earth.
Their vertical scale was just as mind-bending. Sauti describes them as being tall as mountain summits. Seriously, imagine standing at the base of the Himalayas, looking up at the peaks, and suddenly realizing that the mountain is alive. They were moving mountains of scales, fangs, and venom, possessing an unimaginably huge physical presence.
And well beyond their physical size, they possessed literal godlike abilities. The source notes they were capable of assuming any form at will. They were total shapeshifters. Furthermore, they were capable of mastering, at will, any degree of strength. Think about that for a second. Unlimited physical strength, extreme wind-like speed, and the ability to change shape entirely. For all intents and purposes, they were fundamentally invincible beings.
Which leads us to Section 4, and an inescapable, tragic fate. A grim end. We have to reconcile the supreme, unmatched power of these entities with their incredibly grim destiny. Think about this stark juxtaposition. You have entities with unlimited strength, shape-shifting abilities, mountain-sized bodies, and literal apocalyptic poison. Yet their tragic reality was that they were completely helpless. They weren't overpowered by a stronger monster or a bigger weapon. They were overpowered by a mother's curse. The most powerful beings in the universe, burning by the thousands, entirely unable to save themselves.
And the destruction wasn't just physical, it was deeply generational. Sauti laments, "The sons of these snakes, the sons of those sons, I am unable to mention. They are so many." Entire lineages, generations of children and descendants were wiped out completely from history. It was a total, absolute erasure of these ancient, majestic dynasties. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really profound question that the text naturally provokes. We've just seen billions of beings, creatures the size of mountains possessing unlimited strength and apocalyptic power, rendered entirely helpless by destiny and a curse. If creatures of such immense, unimaginable power couldn't escape their fate, who can? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating mythological taxonomy with me. Keep wondering, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.